Yeah, well, I have a draft today is about sanctions, and I have three obvious questions: why, how, and what. So, what should be done? So, why? I think it does need to be emphasized that Russia violated half a dozen major treaties, and in particular these are the UN Charter, of violating the national integrity of a country, the Helsinki Final Act of 1975, and other OSCE agreements. Thirdly, the treaty on the dissolution of the Soviet Union from Almaty in December 91. And we have a very important Budapest memorandum of December 94, in which Ukraine gave up its nuclear arms, having the third largest nuclear force in the world, for apparently no security assurances at all, as it now turns out. And after that we have two treaties with Russia from 97 on the friendship agreement with Russia and Ukraine, and the treaty on the Sevastopol naval base. So why I emphasize this is that Russia has really violated the whole post-Cold War order as we know it. And the two closest annexations that comes to mind in history are Saddam Hussein's annexation of Kuwait in 1990, which did not go down very well in the international community, and Hitler's Anschluss of Austria in 1938. So this is a very serious incident, and therefore, we should not expect the effects to go away. You can say that something similar happened in South Ossetia and Abkhazia in 2008, but the cases are really very different. There was no special status of Crimea in the same way as it was for Abkhazia and South Ossetia. These were remnants, frozen conflicts from the end of the Soviet Union, and it was not clear, it was not at all as clear how the guilt was to be distributed as it is in the case of Crimea. So Crimea remains the fundamental thing, and on top of that we are seeing now a new Russian aggression in eastern Ukraine, and it's quite deplorable how the media are reporting it. Little green men, what they should be called is Russian special forces without insignia, which we all know that they are, and what is particularly galling is when they are called pro-Russian protesters or pro-Russian activists, which is nothing that you called armed and masked men in uniform. So what is happening here is clearly that the Western journalists first read Itarkas and Interfax and RIA Novosti from Moscow, most of the journalists having been based in Moscow, and only afterwards they take interviews in eastern Ukraine and do not check the excellent Ukrainian news services like Ukrainska Pravda or Zerka Nedelya, or not even Kiev Post. So we have got a very distorted public view of it in the Western media, because it all starts from Moscow. And after having devastated the post-Cold War order, the Kremlin has repeatedly made outright false statements, as the State Department had to go out twice and deny 10 falsehoods by Vladimir Putin. Lies is what it's normally called, but you know, the word lie is not really used in modern language because it's too common. So you shouldn't accuse anybody of lying, you only say inaccurate information. But this means that the official Kremlin has proven itself completely unreliable. It's pretty meaningless to pursue any conversation with somebody who persistently lies. For example, in order Lavrov, Shoigu and Putin himself have said that they have withdrawn troops from the border, and it hasn't happened. So if I say it once again, why should anybody listen? And if that is the case, you wonder, why should one talk to them? If this is the only sounds that they let out that are by definition inaccurate. So therefore, the conclusion is sanctions are better than war. And this looks like war otherwise, because that's what happens when a country moves in troops without any right into another country. So the choice is not sanctions or no sanctions, but it's sanctions or war. And therefore, sanctions is much better. So how should the sanctions be imposed? And here we have now got a number of principles built out. My basic view is that this should be as a deterrent. If it's a deterrent, you want you want front-loaded sanctions early on in order to deter further misdeeds. That is the Colin Powell doctrine of shock and awe, to stop further military incursion into Ukraine. But unfortunately, this is not how it's happening. And I fear that we have reached a stage where we just have to notice that. Instead of what we are seeing is a few arguments against doing it, two bad and one decent. The first bad argument is this is how one does sanctions. Well, if the Iranian sanctions were done like that, but everything was different about them, so it doesn't really apply. It was a matter of changing an existing behavior rather than provide a deterrent. So I think that this incrementalism in this regard is quite mindless. The other is a bad argument is to worry about the impact on the Western economy. It's true that the Russian economy is weak, but it also means that it doesn't have much impact on the Western economy. If you take it, Russia's GDP is today 2.9% of global GDP. It's not a big player. And it's slightly less than 1% of US total trade. So Russia is really in the margin of error in the global economy. If you compare with Iran, at present Iranian GDP is 1.1% of global GDP, slightly more than 1/3 of the Russian economy after many years of sanctions. And who complains now about the impact on the Western economy on sanctions? And on top of that, when it comes to the financial side, if there are tougher sanctions on Russia, it means that money will run out of Russia. So there will be more money in the city of London, not less. So it's doubtful that the city of London would lose. It would probably gain from more financial sanctions on Russia. But there is one serious argument that remains, and that is that a common Western front against Russia is important. Clearly, President Putin cares about meetings, as we just saw, between Chancellor Merkel and President Obama here in Washington. Then he realizes that it's important because his modus vivendi is really divide et impera, to divide and rule among the Western powers. And I do think that this is important. Then there is another argument that is quite strongly used, and that is we don't want to turn the whole Russian people against us, against the West. We want to hit the people who are really guilty with a surgical scalpel, as they say here in town, to hit the key culprits. The question is if it's possible. In principle, it's a good argument. So on the basis of these principles, what should be done? Well, the first is, of course, to punish the key culprits with personal sanctions. This has been developed very well from the Belarusian sanctions. They have seemed to be quite punishing to the Belarusian leaders, even if they haven't changed the policy as yet. And this means then essentially three categories that are now being punished, all of them, in good order. First comes the top decision makers, where essentially those have been punished, sanctioned, that we do not have to talk to. And this is both by the EU and by the US. The second group are the Putin cronies, Timchenko, Rotenbergs, and Kovalchuk. And I think that this is a very nice innovation to go after the cronies. Unfortunately, the EU has not picked it up. They need some legislative change. I think that will happen, so that the EU follows up. And this is particularly tickling because Gennady Timchenko and Boris Rotenberg are Finnish citizens. Rotenberg lives in Finland and Timchenko lives in Geneva. So this will complicate their lives quite considerably. And then the third group of key countries are those who are really exploiting Crimea. And to exploit Crimea through Russia should be toxic, and it is becoming so. The second group of targets is, I would argue, the financial sector. And first here we have the crony banks that have been sanctioned now, but that is too little, and also altogether 18 crony banks, crony companies. Enlightened guess is that 1/3 of each of these companies belongs to President Putin himself, and about 1/3 of them belongs to one of the cronies, and then the rest belongs to other people who actually do the job. So this is not only something that should be done now, but this is a matter of cleaning up, because such undertakings are normally called money laundering. So one could sanction them simply on, go after them on money laundering law enforcement. The second category of in the financial sector is state banks. And here we are really waiting for one of the 4 big state banks to be gone after. I understand from that Finnish Economic Bank, VEB, is the one that is on the top list of the administration now. I think that this should be done fast, because the Russian stock market is now coming up back after the Russian incursion looks less likely, but it's not only about that, it's about the general destabilization of Ukraine and Crimea. So I think that this is a key thing now to claim that at least one of the 4 big state banks, Gazprom Bank or Finnish Economic Bank, would be sanctioned. They are clearly the favorite of the administration because it's the least financially connected. So it will give the least collateral damage. They're afraid of going after VTB or Sberbank because they have millions of ordinary Russians as their depositors, and that is unlikely. Then you have highly technical things in the financial sector that can be done. Take Russia out of the sanction reinsurance as such, which will increase the cost, stop credit default swaps for Russia. There are many things like this that can be done, and the US on its own is strong enough to impose this. as we are just seeing that the US is going after one of the big French banks for a few $billion in penalty because of violation of sanctions. So the US here, whether we like it or not, plays an extraterritorial role, and this is a case when that should be used. And finally, as Gideon Rachman argued for in the Financial Times the other day, if nothing else helps, we have a nuclear blow which was used against Iran to take Russia out of the SWIFT system, the international payment system. Nothing that is desirable, but if nothing else works, that is a big blow. And there are other financial things that can be done before. So we should not worry that Russia can manage with the sanctions. The concern here in town is rather that financial sanctions could be too effective. As the IMF and the IIF have projected that Russian GDP this year could fall by 4% in a stress scenario, and we are in a stress scenario, and it could be get much worse. Then we have what the Europeans have. We need to have some balance in the measures. Some countries are dependent on some trade with Russia, some with others. Clearly, military technology is something that should be taken out. And my wife has a wonderful idea. Divert Mistral 1 to the Black Sea for the use of Ukraine, and 1 to the Baltic Sea for the usage of the Balts. That would change the strategic balance in the right direction in these two seas. After all, this is only 600 million euro for each of them. And this is what the US really should pick up. So if the Pentagon takes care of the Mistral for the Black Sea, and the Baltic, Nordic countries and Germany and Poland pick up the other one, when we're in shape, and I think that the French should give some discount on the decency as well. This is really a small problem to be solved, and it must be solved. It is totally unacceptable that France would go ahead and set Mistral, and my guess is that they're really just bargaining because they have postponed the final decision until October. So in October probably they will have found a deal, and I think that we should be helpful to find a deal in this fashion. And then of course high tech for oil and gas is something that one should go after. And if we then look up on the list of people here, the big state enterprise managers and are clearly a part of it, but it's also interesting that even Sechin, who has been sanctioned, does not want Rosneft to take over Chernomorets Neftegas in Crimea, because he does not want Rosneft to be sanctioned, nor does Gazprom want to take it over after Chernomorets Neftegas has been sanctioned by both the EU and the US, and Sberbank does not want to take over banking in Crimea. So we can see here that the sanctions have some impact on the state corporations. But I really don't understand why Rosoboron export is not sanctioned. This should be an obvious target both for the US and the EU. So and what nobody says should be touched is oil, because that would be for the West to shoot itself in the leg. If anything should be done for oil, that's what Phil Verleger has suggested: open the strategic petroleum reserve and lower the price of oil. And of course then also open up for US export of oil. Thank you, Mr.